Hey, Trevor, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Aram.
All right, so for the uninitiated, for people who wouldn't know, or for people who do know, but they don't know what it means to be in your role in the organization you're in, tell us what a COO does, so a chief operating officer. What does that look like for you day to day?
So, Aram, as Chief Operating Officer of Bison Transport, we run one of the largest fleets of tractor trailers in North America, and with my responsibilities, that is to ensure all of our teams that are charged with interacting with our customers and our drivers and all of the people in between that make the freight move around North America seamlessly are in place and doing what they need to do. So my responsibilities cover sales, operations, equipment and maintenance, as well as our analytics efforts in managing all the data that we produce. So it's a fairly broad role that changes day to day based on what's happening in the business.
Okay, that's a great answer because like the COO role is always a little bit misty, right? Like some organizations really know what it is and other ones are like, we don't even know. And actually the COO was kind of a role that was seeming to go away a little bit, but now it started to come back in. So what was your path to this role?
Yeah, so I joined into Bison Transport, which at the time was a very small trucking company, about 65 trucks, based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I got right involved in what we call operations, and that's dispatching, providing support to our drivers on the road, as well as interacting with our clients. Over the years, I was fortunate enough to take on increasing roles of responsibility through the operating elements of our business, and as we expanded our business through that whole period, was able to involve myself in startup units, like when we developed refrigerated services or intermodal services or logistics services. And so every time there was an opportunity to grow the business, jumped on it and really went with it that way to get to where we are today.
How defined were those roles though? So when you joined the organization, it was smaller. It was a smaller place and it's grown. So when you started, were your roles very defined and kind of like, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do here and easy to do? Or was there always an element of trying to like, well, what is this role and how do I make it work?
Yeah, very much the latter. And just for context for you, we were a 65 truck operation, which might have had $7 or $8 million in sales at that point. Next year, we're going to do $1 billion in sales across all of our different business units. And through that, the roles were defined to a degree. You'd have this sort of core responsibilities, but when you go through a transformation of that size and that many different things going on in the business, it's always evolving. And so you really, as a leader, are looking to apply yourself into whatever area needs your attention. And so there's a bit of ambiguity with that, which I think any good leader needs to square themselves up with, to say, here's what my core responsibilities are, but also be on the watch out for what is needed, and then understand how you might be part of that solution to that need.
Yeah, well, 7 million to 1 billion that's a little bit of a jump, man. That's a slight increase. So if you're thinking about it from role to role to role, how did you square up with ambiguity? And, the reason I'm pushing on this is the COO role is something I've always been a bit fascinated with, because it's like, it is actually quite ambiguous. It sounds like it's something really clear, but from company to company, it could be like a totally different beast. So how did you, as you went on that path and as the organization went through this drastic growth, how did you square up with that ambiguity?
Yeah, I think you're right, Aram, in terms of the various definitions to the COO title, and I think a lot of that is predicated likely on the type of business that you're in, and operations can be quite different from one organization to another. In the transportation industry, it's fairly well known to say, what does it take to actually get the work that you're being paid for accomplished, and that's kind of the starting point for the operating elements of it. So how you square up the ambiguity of a growing organization with lots of moving parts. It's something that I think you really have to start with a mindset that says, I'm okay with the fact that I won't know necessarily everything that is going to be required of me in a given day, week, or month, but to be prepared to be flexible around that whole concept. The positive element that I would highlight about it is that, and I've always felt this way in my career, is that if there was a problem or an opportunity, and there always is, I had the wherewithal to be part of that solution. I wasn't looking to say, okay, is this somebody else's to do? This is something that I can have influence on myself. Through that feedback cycle that goes on with having some tough learnings with that and some good experiences with it, you get comfortable with that nature of things.
Well, that accountability that you just talked about, that willingness to be like, actually, I can actually be a part of making this happen. Was that something natural to you or something that you learned through your career?
There's a little bit of that instinct that I've had over time, but was very fortunate that as I got started in my career, there was a number of people around me that led that way by example, and where it could have been easy to get into a tendency of saying, why doesn't somebody fix that, or this is a real problem, I can't deal with this anymore. I saw people that were of that mindset to say, let's get in here and do something about it, and or without even saying that, they just did, and you watch that and you said, okay, there's something to that, and so whenever you edged towards maybe a more passive approach or being a victim in a situation, you'd say, no, I don't think that's what John would do in this situation. So you learn along the way.
Yeah, it sounds like you were influenced by the people around you.
Yeah, big time. And I think anybody that has any level of success, or any organization that does, has to, you can be an influencer in that yourself. But bigger part is that you have to be fortunate enough to have enough of the right people around you, and enough of the things go right in order to actually make it happen.
Yeah, because it's not just as easy as being like, oh, I surround myself with the right people, which is actually quite hard. But that's like part of the equation, surrounding yourself with the right people. But also part of it is like being in the right business, and also a little bit of like the blind luck of just, the right stuff's got to happen. Yeah,
it really is. And in our industry, as we were making our way, and there was lots of examples you could see around where there was companies that were bigger than us and better than us, and had some things going for them. But you often see, certainly in our industry, that they'd reach a certain size and they would notably fail either with their people or with their customers or in their reputation. And you'd be curious and say, why is that? What's happening there? And what do we need to learn about that? And so, in that degree, you can ideally make some of your own luck, but there's no question in my mind that right place, right time, right people. You need a little bit of that karma to be in place for you for things to work out. And I never diminish that part of the equation.
Totally, man. Because there's always just some element of like luck, just the right people, the right place, all of that. So a question for you though, if we're hitting on that accountability and actually even around like, let's say ambiguity, from your perspective, how do you get people there? So let's say someone who's not experienced with dealing with ambiguity, and I'd like the term that you used earlier, like square up with it. So someone who's not really familiar or comfortable dealing with ambiguity, or someone that you want to impress, help them become a bit more accountable. And the reason why I'm focusing on accountability here and actually ambiguity is I hear a lot of feedback from leaders like, oh, I just want people to be comfortable with ambiguity, or oh, I just want them to become more accountable. When these are actually like really complex psychological things that need to happen. And it's both how you think about it and also the skills you have. So how do you as a leader like coach and mentor people up to get more comfortable with those things?
Yeah, I think there's a few different tactics I would use and think about. And our business is one that always provides a lot of different circumstances, and so there's a lot of in the moment types of experiences. And I know we're recording this at a moment in time, but we're in another one of those situations right now where, and I think you're in the Lower Mainland.
I'm in Vancouver.
Yeah, and so you're close to a real natural disaster that's going on right now, and that ties right into our industry. And as a team, we've spent a lot of time this week going through how do we respond to this situation that is really unprecedented, to have this level of impact to an area of the country where a city is actually inaccessible by roadway for a period of time. You say, let's draw off our other experiences with that and say there's no playbook that says, okay, you do A, B, and C when every single highway is closed for a prolonged period of time. It's like, guys, we need to ask the questions to say, what is possible here? What's in our sphere of influence? What's in our control? And let's get at it. And there's the questioning in the live moments and situations. And then you also need to combine that with an appropriate amount of direction when it's needed. Say, okay, here's something that we're going to do, and we should get this out to our team now. And so combining between that concept of questioning and drawing out and getting people to be thinking through it as you're going through it, and then providing direction at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. Would you mind if I share a little bit of my philosophy around coaching people in terms of like vague things like accountability and getting comfortable with ambiguity?
Please.
When I think of coaching, I like to break it down because I think like coaching is like such a vague term. It's like, oh, I got to be a great coach. It's like, well, whoa, what do you mean? And there's three ways I look at it. Instructing. So instructing someone is just showing someone how to do something. And that's super valuable. Like, you show someone how to do something and then you get them to do it over and over again. And through doing it again and again, through repetition and feedback, they get better at it. So they become more precise at it. That's instruction. Then I go over to the other side where I'd say there's influence. And influence is like kind of when you were talking about learning how to square up with ambiguity and also accountability. Influence is shaping the way people think, right? And it's about, and you could be doing that directly by talking to them about an idea, or they could just be watching you, but you're influencing their thinking. So one is an action. You're instructing on an action. The other one is that you're challenging or helping form up thinking. Neither of those is coaching, in my opinion. One's instructing and one's influencing thinking. The middle ground between those two is coaching. Coaching is where you're instructing someone and you're also trying to change their thinking. So I'd think of like a good driving instructor. Like a good driving instructor would be an incredible coach because you're not just teaching someone like the mechanics of how to drive. You're also trying to teach them how to be a good citizen of the road, how to be like, hey, if someone cuts you off, they're not just necessarily being a jerk to you. Maybe they're in an emergency, or maybe they just literally, it was just a lapse of judgment. They didn't realize what they did. The realm of probability that they were being a jerk is probably like, that's the lowest thing. And there could have been a complex set of circumstances that brought you guys together. So instead of reacting to them and speeding up and kind of shaking your fists at them, instead you take a pause and figure out how to be a good citizen of the road. That's showing someone how to drive, but also how to think about driving. So you could be teaching them about defensive driving tactics while also teaching them how to be a good citizen of the road. And for me, that would be coaching, that middle ground between instruction and influencing.
Yeah, I like that framework, certainly. And I think that's, I think in trying to influence, you're certainly, try to ask that thoughtful question or frame up that scenario and get people to really ideally arrive there on their own.
Totally. The other piece that I'd put in, and this goes to accountability specifically, is like the first question I ask when people talk about, hey, I want people to be more accountable, I'm like, well, are you clear in what you're asking them? And communication is an interesting thing because like you or me or anyone could be like, oh, so-and-so didn't do it. But the first question we have to say is, well, did I make it clear what I was asking them to do? And that's where I think the value of a really strong call to action. And a call to action is like, it should be three things: concrete. What exactly are you asking someone to do? Like specifically, what are the actions? And then it should be timely. Like when is it going to get done? And then it should be assignable. Everyone involved should know what their parts are. So concrete, timely, assignable, call to action. I'd say like a pretty, very often when I'm like, oh, Aram, we've got to get that person to be more accountable. Feel like, well, what's the work that maybe you need to do about being a little bit more clear in your asks? Are you being concrete? Are you being timely? Are you being, is it assignable? Because we all have habits as leaders where we just kind of like we think we're expressing what needs to be done, and then we're leaving people kind of guessing. And if your audience has to do too much work around figuring out what you want, then there's no way they can be accountable to it because they don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the leader that bemoans the accountability of his team or a colleague is not looking in the mirror enough because it can often be related to how the expectation is set and whether it's clear enough. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, 100%, man. And like, I want to get to some of the challenges of the specific world you're in, but I do want to stay a little bit with your development as a professional, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right. So in your growth, you're going through this, like, you join this company, it's relatively small, although for some people that would still be a huge company to join, but it's relatively small compared to what it is today. And you're going up, you're going from role to role, you're squaring up with, like vagueness and kind of figuring things out. What's different about you today than how you were as a professional, let's say 2 to 5 years ago? What's can you say is specifically different about you now?
I would say from in the last 2 or 3 years, I'll say really honing my ability to look at things from a strategic lens. Like as an operator, as somebody that was born in sort of the guts of the business, it's like the always available high. If you will, to be into the action. And here, what are we doing? How are we doing it? I've got valuable experience in here, and I enjoy sharing that and being a part of that. But as your business grows, and I mentioned, learning from actively assessing other businesses and when they grow and sometimes lose their mojo and what got them there and why that happens. And you say, if you're gonna fulfill the need of a larger organization, and you say you have to remember the core elements that made you successful, but you can't ride them endlessly, and you have to say, okay, so what are we going to do differently now in order to make that happen? And I've become increasingly aware and I'll say to a degree comfortable with the fact that we need to continue to push the different elements of our business, not just what we do, but how we do it, in order to make sure that we can be sustainable. Being in the same organization for my entire career, which is not as common these days, or maybe it never was. And people will ask me about that and say, how do you do that? I go, well, I've had the benefit of it not being the same company from where I started to where it is now. It's completely different. So I don't even view it necessarily as the same. And as I mentioned off the top, I've always had this ability, thought that I would have influence over it. So I said, if I don't like something, then I should probably fix it, or be a part of the solution to fix it. And so that's what's kept me going, and my renewal process through what's turned out to be a pretty long career in the business.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great answer. All right, I got 2 more questions about your journey, and then I want to go over to the industry you're in, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
All right, what's a piece of feedback that you've gotten in your career, like developmental feedback, that you've been able to successfully address, and how did you do it?
Early on, I got some feedback that told me explicitly, you need to be a bit tougher. You need to. And what my leader and mentor was really referring to there was not obviously physically tough, although that could be the case, but it was
beef up, man.
Exactly, you got to bulk up for this business. But it was more on the lines of being able to have those meaningful but difficult conversations and that could be with a team member or a member of our driving staff or even to a customer, and say, like we've got to be able to assert ourselves in the situations that call for it. Otherwise there's going to be a lack of order and even respect if that's going to be it. So that was one that I had received pretty early on, and I think put it into the right context and right use.
So how did you get there though? How did you address it?
probably, if I'm honest, through lots of repetition and ample opportunity to exercise and practice it. And to be honest, it would be still something that I would be aware of and work on today. I've got an empathetic nature, and I want to ensure that I always am understanding what somebody else might be going through or where they're coming from, and you want to make sure that you do that in proper context, because I think it's very, very healthy and serves me well in a lot of situations. But you want to be checking that. So through repetition and reflection.
Heck yeah, that is a great answer. And yeah, I love that you said like empathy has been such an important part of, well, just of who you are and how you do your job. And you got to figure out how to make it work the right way for the business at different roles. And I'll give you an example. I know lots of people that are like super funny, and being funny and being able to inject humor into things is amazing, but you don't want to inject humor into every single situation. You need to know how to use that thing so it benefits people. So any ability, and again, I define a skill as something that you learn and that you hone, where an ability is something that you have naturally, and that you hone that as well. But a skill is something you learn, and ability is something you have. It sounds like you had some natural ability around empathy, and you had just had to figure out how best to use it at each role as you've gone up.
Certainly, and I came across a framework that I found pretty helpful on this whole topic, and typical 2x2 matrix, where you have accountability on the y-axis and you have empathy on the x-axis, and you say, so within there's the four boxes, and if you're low on both, you can look at this through a cultural lens. If you're a low culture and low empathy organization, that's the nightmare, right? There's nothing good that has on there. But if you're empathetic without accountability, you got the country club or the daycare or whatever you want to call it. And if you're high accountability with no empathy, then you're the boot camp, or you're some militaristic type of scenario. But if you can get the right amount of both in that top quadrant and be empathetic but also accountable, that's where the magic is. And it's something that we've traded on in our business. Like our industry is known to be have a lot of challenges to it and stress to it, and different types of pressures. If you can have a culture that says, we're gonna figure this out together. And sometimes culture gets misused, and you say, oh, your place has a good culture. Well, that must mean everybody's nice and nobody has that has that tough conversation. And we have to routinely clarify that in our business and say, yeah, we have a great culture, guys, but accountability is actually a big part of that.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. That idea of good culture gets weaponized a lot so that people can sometimes people bring up the idea of culture because they want the environment to adapt to them. And they'll use something like culture, be like, oh, it's not a good culture and what they're trying to say is, the culture is not good if I don't get to act how I want to act. That means you have a bad culture. And because culture is such like an important thing, but also it's like a very hot topic right now, that people can become reactive. Like, oh no, we got some feedback that we have a bad culture. It's like, no. Like, first of all, like, let's pay attention to what this person's saying. It's important. But is this someone who's willing to adapt to the environment? And our job is to make sure that environment does reflect what our values are. Or is this person trying to weaponize things to make the environment adapt to them? And it's an interesting thing because very often organizations will bring me back like, oh, we were told that our culture wasn't good. And then we'll kind of do a deep dive and be like, no, your culture's great. We think that what I think is happening here is someone's actually like kind of like bombing you a little bit with this idea, and it's putting you on your heels. And not always. Sometimes it's in between, and sometimes there's work to be done on both sides. But culture is super important, but the idea of it can get weaponized if people are trying to manipulate you into something.
Yeah, and it can be misinterpreted where you say, okay, well, we want a good culture and we have a good culture, and that may be a reason why I wouldn't have that tough conversation with so-and-so, because we want to make sure everybody feels good. And you go, no, that's actually the exact opposite. Like if we're not letting people know where they stand, that's actually cruel. It's not right.
All right. So one more question about you, and then let's switch over to talking about your industry. What's a piece of feedback that you've gotten that you've struggled to adapt to, or that you're still working on?
I think more recently, Aram, it would probably be around the fact that sometimes there will be some people that would find my approach or me intimidating in certain situations. When I first heard that, I was genuinely puzzled, and I found it almost hard to believe. But as time has progressed, and I would pick that up and solicit that from other people and say, yeah, there can be situations in a meeting where you're gonna your words are gonna carry a bunch of weight, or that discussion or that meeting is going to go differently because you're in it. And as somebody who joined the business as a kid and sort of grew up in it and still feel myself to be, youthful and sort of genuine, I just go, so what am I doing that's sort of giving that impression that's not my intention? And recognizing that some people may intentionally go down that path and want to use power that way or think about it that way. And for me, that's the farthest thing from my mind. I'm always to say, how do we get to the right outcome, team? And that's what I'm interested in. And I would love it if you did it, it was your idea and carried it through. So that's a piece that I'm still aware of and working on, and recognize that sometimes you don't, as an executive leader now, you don't necessarily start at level par with people. There's almost an assumption, you got this title, and so obviously you're somebody and you're something, and you say, okay, well, let's break that down and get back to level here, and let's actually just talk about what's going on.
Totally. It's it's odd how like a title can kind of like strip away a little bit of your humanity. It's like suddenly you're just like a figurehead instead of just being a person who's like vulnerable and has like things they're excited about and things they're afraid of. And can I give you a piece of feedback to consider around this?
Please.
Okay. There are three things that I think it's what I'd suggest is consider tone setting. And tone setting happens in the first 2 to 5 minutes of a conversation. And there's always someone setting the tone. Always. Either you're setting the tone, or I'm setting the tone, or we're co-creating the tone. And tone setting is like a pretty wild thing, because if we're the leader in the room, or perhaps we're the person facilitating the conversation, or maybe we're going to have a presentation, whatever it is, if we come in and we start speaking, as speakers, we don't usually become our best version of ourselves until around the 5 to 7 minute mark. Because, it's like warming up an engine, right? It gets warm, then it's in proper operating space. So like that first 5 to 7 minutes is just us becoming our best version of the speaker. But our audience is paying the strictest amount of attention in the first 2 to 5 minutes that we're speaking. And they're using that 2 to 5 minutes to judge the tone. Is this going to be valuable? Does this person think I should be here? Do they respect me? Is this going to be a scary meeting? Should I go all in on it? And it's this weird inverted scale, because we're just I'm trying to warm up my engine here. But everyone, like the other people are like, oh, well, what's happening? And that 2 to 5 minutes and getting really good at it has to do with making sure that we're locked in on three things. And the three things are our expression. And around our expression, it's like from the tip of your nose to the top of your forehead, and then from just under your nose to the bottom of your chin. You want to make sure that, because they kind of operate separately, you want to make sure both of these things are working together, saying the same thing. And the thing that they're saying is actually on point to what you're actually saying. So like your facial expression is supposed to match the content of what you're saying. So the first thing is facial expression. The second thing is how you're saying it. So it's your tone of voice, how quickly you're speaking, what your volume is, where your enunciation is. And then the third is the content of what you're saying. And one of the things that I always see with great leaders that they maybe get like called intimidating, or part of it is, of course, title. And that's, we get that humanity stripped away from us, even if we're super nice, right? But a lot of it is, all right, that 2 to 5 minutes is they don't know how to set the tone from moment one. And not only that, it's what's happening here, and with their tone of how they're speaking is off from their content. Our audience doesn't know that. They don't recognize that right off the bat, but they're left with they're trying to reconcile what they're seeing and hearing with what the content of what we're saying is. And the closer you can get to closing the gap between those three things so they all work together, the better you can be at tone setting right off the bat in that first 2 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's great feedback and perspective on that. And we all know around the cues of body language and the power of those things being actually greater than just voice or word or content, as you say, and that certainly rings true.
Can I give you a super easy way to work on it? So anyone who wants to work on this stuff, like, you do not need to pay a coach for this. Like, I would tell people you don't need to take a class or anything. All you need to do is get an iPad or a tablet, whatever it is. Do your phone calls, like actually have a phone call, but record yourself on video as you're doing it and speak to yourself. Like, literally look at yourself as you're speaking. Now, of course, you want to put it in a headset so you're not recording the other person as you're speaking, or else that's like creepy and illegal. But as you're speaking, you're recording how you're sounding and you're getting instant feedback on how you're looking. And the beautiful thing is the other person can't see you. So you can try a bunch of different stuff. You can see how things feel. If you do that, and then as soon as you're done the call, the minute you're done the call, go back and watch it. And let's say it's like a 20-minute call. Don't watch the whole 20 minutes. Watch the first 5 minutes, then go into the middle, watch 3 to 5 minutes, and then go to the end and watch the last like 2 minutes. If you get that instant feedback loop and you record yourself, anyone who does that about twice a week for 6 weeks will easily conquer this, no problem. You don't need to see a coach. You don't need to go to some course, any of those things. It's all just about saying, like, how do I want to come across? But you can't do that unless you become your own audience. So in a live setting, you want to be able to see what kind of signals you're throwing up.
Sounds like you have some experience with this working.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I started as a therapist. I was a therapist before I did this. And in my first year, my boss took me aside and was like, I just have to tell you, you are a terrible therapist. And I was like, oh no. And he's like, you talk too much, you talk too fast, you take up too much space in the conversation, your physical presence is off. So not everything, a lot of our communication stuff that we teach, it's because I actually taught myself this. I just had to figure out how to do it with, like, as a therapist, you don't have a training budget, right? So you just have to figure it out. And plus, like, I was pretty sure I was going to get fired if I didn't get really good really fast at this stuff. So I learned how to do it. And I'm just a big believer in, like, I totally think coaching is a very important thing. Obviously, I started this company, but I also think a lot of stuff is like, don't put the power in the hands of a coach or a mentor. Get the feedback, but then figure out your own system of doing it. And this is one that most people can just work on. And it is the way that I manage my own stuff.
Great advice.
All right, let's hear about the industry that you're in, man. I can only imagine what transportation is like in this day and age of this really seriously pressured supply chain situation. So what's happening in your industry around that?
Yeah, it's certainly become more in vogue, and I'll say even dialing back to the start of the pandemic, where there was a genuine spotlight and ultimately appreciation for those that move the goods around that people depend upon, and that's kind of continued through this period. And now everybody's wondering, okay, so what's wrong? What's wrong with the supply chain and those that are participating in it, and the things around port backups and driver shortages and all those things are much more in the general public view. And for those of us that have been in the industry for a while, I think we can have a bit of a broader perspective on this. And I'll say, firstly, number one, the fact is there's always disruptions in the supply chain. They just vary in levels of severity and duration. And so we're in one or a series of ones right now that are longer and more severe. And so there's a bit more appreciation of it. But since I've been in the industry, there's always something dramatically changing. And it's all, to a large degree because we've pushed the envelope globally in terms of what it is that we would expect, and going from where we were 30 years ago to say, it should be nice when when produce season starts again and we'll get some fresh fruit in the store, to now punching a button on our phone and expecting a certain object or piece of food to arrive at my given location within minutes. That's kind of the evolution of supply chain. So we've we've amped it up considerably. It's far more global. There's so many more moving parts, and every organization is trying to do it as efficiently and lean as possible. And so it's prone to some of these things. And right now we're going through a supply and demand shock at the same time. Demand is up. Supply is actually maintained pretty well through this thing, all things considered. Mm-hmm. It's just that demand has continued to be sort of, inordinate for a bunch of different things over a bunch of different periods, and that's causing some strain. So in terms of our industry itself, and our business is one of the transportation intermediaries. So we have the 2,150 trucks on the road. We have 5,000 trailers that we're using to move goods across North America. And we also move things on the rail and move things through other companies on our behalf. And so our business is full on out every day to say how is it that we continually hone what it is that we do, the value proposition, not only for the people that are paying us to move the goods, but for those that are actually doing the actual work to do it. And there's lots of moving parts. It's what's drawn me into the business to begin with. It's like putting a puzzle together all the time and saying, how do we make this work? But it's without question, there's some real challenges these days.
Man, you hit on some stuff there that we got to go deeper on. So first, I love what you said. It was like, hey, supply chain has always got challenges. And something you kind of, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I'll certainly say it's like, it's very, it's like a real media talking point right now, like supply chain, like, the supply chain. And I can only imagine being in that industry, just be like, every time you hear this being like, oh my God, like we're on it, we're doing it, like we're taking care of it. And yeah, like the supply chain is, there's pressure and all of that, but there's always been pressure, especially with the injection of technology. Like what you said about like going from like, wow, I hope we get mangoes, when the time comes, to, hey, I ordered a mango like 5 minutes ago. Where is it? Like, I don't even know how your industry has been able to meet that switch in technology that seems to have taken place in a very short period. So how have you been able to even rise to the challenge? Forget the pandemic. How has the business been able to rise to the challenge in this since technology became such a major factor?
I would say through investing in people, investing in the technology itself to make more of these things possible. I'll give you an example. In the early days, when I started, if you were dispatching a truck, you had to be really sure on what those instructions were when he was on the payphone and you were on the telephone, and you gave that direction, and he was going to head out 500 miles in one direction. You had no other way to contact that individual. If something changed, like right after you hung up the phone, he's gone. And so you go from that era to today, where we have instantaneous tracking on every piece of equipment, the activity, the people can connect to each other simultaneously. There's data that's being fed and then filtered into saying, and then we boil it up to say, here are the things that actually matter. So there's all these things going on, but smart design, smart process work can say, here are the things that actually matter, that need attention, and then you can make the whole problem manageable that way. And so, technology has created challenges. As you say, it's raised the bar in some circumstances, but it's also hugely enabling. And there's lots that will think that we are just in the very early innings of that as it applies to transportation. Some may say, transportation has even been a laggard in some regards in terms of how it's gotten there. And there's a term out there now called freight tech, which is really only coined in the last 5 years seriously. And everybody's piling money into freight and the technology that supports the movement of goods, because they think there's the next Uberization that's gonna happen to the movement of goods. And like many things that are hyped, there's a lot of, call it outsized expectations around it. Like most things that are hyped, there's also nuggets of real truth and value in there, and that is going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to me because so I've done a lot of work with railways, a ton of work basically in different kinds of areas of transportation. And this whole, the system figuring it out, going step by step, thoughtful diligence, kind of learning by falling on its face or having these big leaps of like, oh, that's how we can do this. It's like how good business is done. That's how you figure it out. But then suddenly the expectation of like, oh, wow, I can't wait till mangoes are in season. I'm going to get them, in whenever that is at some point too. I want my mango in 5 minutes that I just ordered on whatever mango delivery service. How do you handle the expectation side of it? Because you've talked a lot about like figuring out the system. What about just the psychology of expectation?
Yeah, it's massive, Aram, and I think you're hitting exactly on it. And I think every business has to deal with that. In ours, no exception, and it's from all stakeholders, right? There's the expectation of the customer who pays your wage, and there's the expectation of in our case, say the driver who earns your wage, and then there's the expectation of the employee and colleague and what their job is like and how fulfilling it is and how reasonable it is and all those things. And it's amped up every single year period since I've been in the business, and I don't see it slowing down on any of those fronts. And I should add the stakeholder shareholder element, and there's expectation. That's great, but how do we get to the next level here?
Totally. Can I share a story with you from like my punk roots?
Yeah, great.
So I grew up playing in punk bands, and I ran a record label called React Records. And I will never, ever, ever forget this. Like, you put a record up for pre-order. And when I say a record, it's like you're selling like 1,000 records to people all over the world. But it's just like you and your friends who are like packaging these things. So you sell the records, you get them, and you got to like on your spare time, not when you're working or in school or anything. Like, you're doing this on your weekends or at night, you're packing records. And I'll never forget the feeling of like selling someone a record, and then within 5 days, they're like, where's my record? And it's like, I literally couldn't have gotten you this record in 5 days. It's impossible to, even if I mailed it from the moment that you bought it, I couldn't get it to your house right now. And getting these like deeply angry, insulting emails like, you reflect the worst part of like the punk scene. It's like, homie, you bought a 7-inch record. like give me 2 weeks, give me a month, and you'll get it. And as you're telling this story, I just think it's like, instead of having like 5 angry emails from like hardcore kids across the world, it would be like having thousands and thousands and thousands of people wanting something, but blaming the transportation and supply chain as if there hadn't been all this good work and good people and good thinking behind it. It's like, you let us down. It's like, well, no, like we're trying to meet this need. I can only imagine what it would be like to keep the health of an organization under that amount of strain. So I want to go there in a second, but like, any thoughts on what I just said there around that like level of expectation?
It's, on the one hand, it's daunting and even in some situations like yours, potentially unfair, perhaps in terms of how that comes across. On the other hand, it's kind of how we've evolved, right? If you take a look at it as people, and you say the reason why we've gotten this far is that we're not satisfied with what today is. You're trying to remind yourself of that when somebody's being completely unreasonable about what it is that you can or should be able to do in a situation. But that's maybe how I either rationalize or make sense of the whole expectations piece.
Yeah. Well, my friend, you will never know the fury of a hardcore kid in wherever the heck they're from, demanding their 7-inch record that they spent $8 on. They're very angry that they didn't get their 7-inch record. I hope you never have to experience that.
Well, in the punk scene, which I think is where your roots are, I think that's part of the breeding to begin with, is to be hair trigger on anything. So
the system, man, the system. All right, I have a few questions left for you. I got one question about organizational health, and then I'm going to have 3 more questions as we close off. So my question around organizational health, like, you have scaled up, like, wow, the organization has grown a lot in your time. And I love what you said. It's like, it's always kind of a different company for me because I'm in different phases of the company. So it's like a different thing. But you work in a job where there's high expectation, like where people want whoever's waiting for those goods at the other end, they're waiting for it. And also, like, we're in this time where we're, of course, in Vancouver, we're in the middle of a natural disaster, and our hearts go out to everyone in the Lower Mainland who's really suffering some serious consequences of this.
Absolutely.
How do you, as a leader, maintain the health and wellness of an organization that is racing at the best of times, is like, always racing to kind of get stuff to people, but also that has to accommodate and shift and move in situations like the pandemic and then this natural disaster? How do you keep your organization whole and healthy?
One of the keys for us is positive reinforcement. Feedback is something that is so valuable. Everybody knows it, but it's still often in short supply. Our job as a business is, we do spend a lot of time focusing on what's not right, what didn't get there, what job has not been not been carried out the right way, or isn't fair to the individual doing it, or any of those kinds of things. But one of those, call it great leveling things, is to say, let's remind ourselves what we're doing right, and remind this person what they're doing right, and how valuable it is that what it is that they're doing. And I think that's a big part of it, and it's one that I'll say is a continual need to remind ourselves to say, let's make sure that we can find that right balance between not being oblivious to what the problems are, but to recognize where there is good work, and have a feeling of pride and satisfaction about what's being accomplished. It goes a long way.
Heck yeah, I love that. All right, here are the final three questions, and they're tough ones. So you can take your time with each of them. So we get people from all different walks of life that come to hear about leadership at our podcast. So we got people from the punk scene, people from the corporate world, people from athletics, people from social and political movements. And they're interested in hearing different takes on leadership. So if you were to think about yourself as a leader, what advice or thinking would you give people about what's important to you as a leader, being a leader?
What's important to me as a leader, and has been throughout, is that recognition that as a leader you got a responsibility to serve others, and not the other way around. Mm-hmm. I think there can be a misunderstanding or a wrong-headed approach about that sometimes. Okay, so now I'm a boss and I've got this team and they work for me, and that should happen. But I think the correct view on leadership is around saying, okay, so how am I creating the environment, the circumstances, the ability for people to be successful? Because the degree to which I'll be deemed to be successful is going to be largely measured through the efforts of others. And so for me to be able to coordinate, motivate, bring into that mindset, I think is the core function of a leader. Obviously, nobody can lead if they don't take care of themselves first and have that part figured out. But it's through the efforts of others, and I think that's a key recognition for anybody in a leadership role.
Heck yeah, I love that. All right, next is, if you were to think about people who are totally outside of your industry, they don't work in it. What's something that you'd want people who are from outside your industry to understand about your industry, to really get?
I think topical right now, and it has been, and we maybe touched on it a little bit around, through the conversation, but we talk about the driver shortage, and for some it's like this kind of new concept, and I think what people have to understand about our industry is that this is a long-standing issue that has been generally underattended to, and it's a complex issue that for more time than we would have today. But I would just say appreciate the men and women who are out there that are getting these things figured out on our behalf, and allow us to enjoy the standard of living that we have. And as I said, in the pandemic shone some light on that, and but our memories are always fleeting, and so I think that's an important piece of it. Technology is a great enabler, and there's much conversation and hype about when the trucks are going to drive themselves, but in reality that's a ways off. They're going to continue to get safer and better to operate and all the rest of it, but until then, we need folks who are motivated and positively reinforced for doing the work that they do for us.
Yeah, I love that. And also, I'm a little terrified of the idea that might be happening, the self-driving trucks. A, that's scary. B, Skynet, the Terminator. How close are we to the Terminator if that starts happening? Final question. Across any genre, any country, anything you want, 3 of your favorite bands of all time.
Well, I'm not going to pander here, Aram, but the Ramones were one of my formative bands from that era. Guns N' Roses, I had a heavy phase, and still an appreciation. And more contemporary, maybe been a big fan of U2 and what they've done over the years, and all the rest of it. So I've got a varied approach to the music, but I definitely had a punk phase, and still appreciate if it's alt rock now or whatever the terminology would be. There's a bunch of good stuff that happened in that era.
Heck yeah. Well, you just let me know if you ever want to shave your head and be a roadie for my band. I would love to have you. So you're more than welcome to join us anytime.
Well, I'm in Winnipeg today. I don't know if the Royal Albert is still going or not, but I've been there. So
heck yeah. That's awesome, man. All right. Well, Trevor, thank you so much for joining us. Anything that you want to add in before we close off today?
Just appreciation for the opportunity to speak with you, Aram. I've admired the work and the fact that you've built a business up around coaching. I think it's a concept that I wasn't originally familiar with, sort of going back a number of years ago, but I became familiar with the concept of business coaching and I've been engaged with a coach for over 12 years now. Somebody outside of the business that gives perspective on what's who you are and what you might be different than what you're going to get from your regular circles. And so I'll just say, props to that. It's important conversation, and hope you have continued success.
Heck yeah. Well, thank you so much, Trevor. Everyone, we appreciate you joining us. And this has been an episode of One Step Beyond. One